Hey guys, this is Wojtek, and today we're going to pick up part 4 of our Unreal C++ Fundamentals course talking about the Animation Instance class. And the Animation Instance class is this container that's attached to our skeleton or our mesh and has hooks into all of the animations we're going to be playing back through our montages, specifically through these functions that I'm showing here where they're labeled as montage underscore. And these various functions allow us to play things back and stop and pause and rewind and do all kinds of interesting functions. And we're going to use that to rewind and manipulate parts of our punch animation to make it look a little bit more organic and exciting. So let's get into it. Alright guys, so let's just dive straight into our animation instances. And before we actually leverage them for our nefarious needs, let's just do a quick refresher as to how do we get here. Well, a little while back we went ahead and we created this player character and we gave him some sound effects and some punch animations, and then we put these little collider boxes on his fists so when it hits an object it actually pushes that object into that direction and triggers a hit. But you'll notice very quickly that once we have this thing trapped in a corner, our animations play independent of the physical collisions with our box. They end up going into it. You get these sort of double hits, all that yellow stuff on the left there. Those are all the hits being detected as the boxes are flying through the bigger box. Sorry, these collision boxes are flying through this box that we're punching. So what we're going to do is look at a couple different functions that animation instances provide us where we can do a little bit of movie magic, a little bit of trickery to convince the player that when we make contact with this box, we stop and, like in the real world, our hand would react with that object. Now, there's a lot of different ways of going about this. Inverse kinematics, root motion, very sort of bone physical definitions that you can put on your player to simulate this, but we're going to be sort of DIY budgetecture. We're going to apply this very simple technique and a couple of these simple techniques to kind of mask this particular problem. So to do that, let's take a look at Visual Studio, and what we're going to take a look at is our player character CPP class, and we'll just quickly run through the logic that is occurring in order to trigger the animations. So we know that our punch is triggered by the attack input being pressed with our left mouse button, which takes us to the attack input function. Cool. Let's take a look at that. Attack input ends up actually pulling out our montage definition from a data table, which we covered in our previous tutorial. That montage definition then gets a random selection assigned to it based on just the amount of animations that are tied to this montage. And we simply pull out a random value and then use that to determine which starting section of that animation is actually going to play. And then once we have that, we actually play that section of the montage. Cool. So if we go back to our Unreal editor and we go to Content, Tutorial Resources, Animations, if we pop open the Melee Fist Attack montage, you'll notice this is kind of where all this stuff is happening. So there's our sections, start 1, start 2, end 1, end 2. And that's going to kick off our punches. Now, when those punches get kicked off, you'll notice there's no more additional logic here kind of in the montage. The montage is done its bit, it's been started with a particular section. So what else is happening in our montage? We end up triggering this attack start notify state. And we'll disregard these additional notifies up here. Those are from our previous tutorial. We're just kind of expanding on the notification concepts, and we'll clean that up later. But for right now, let's just take a look at the attack start notify state. Start. And what that guy ends up being tied to, if we open up the actual class, the attack start notify state class, we have our begin and our end. And what the begin is doing, which is the one we care about, is it ends up grabbing the owner of the thing we're executing from. We turn that into the player just through a little bit of typecasting, and then we actually initiate the attack start method on the player. All right, cool. Let's go back to the player and look at attack start, and there it is. And attack start is just doing collision profile enabled for my left and my right fist collision box. All right, what is this doing? Well, this is tying our collision boxes on our hands to, if we go back to our begin play, to delegate methods, specifically on attack hit. So when this component collides with something, pass all of that information over to this on attack hit method. All right, going back to on attack hit, which is just down here, we'll notice we have a bunch of stuff happening. So what do? Well, we're getting some information about who we interacted with. That's all that yellow text on the left-hand side there that we saw. And then we're actually playing the sound animation. That's kind of cool. But we have no logic in here about the animation itself. We don't know much about it. It happened sort of outside of our scope, and through a series of unfortunate events, we ended up here in the on attack hit method. Okay, how do we bring that montage in here, and then we can start doing stuff with it? Well, let's go back to our attack input method and see what's happening here. Well, we're creating a local attack montage variable to the scope of this attack input function, and it's only accessible in here. So to expose it to our on attack hit, what we're going to do is we're going to take this variable definition. I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to turf the data type signature. And you'll notice we're getting some compilation errors because this variable now doesn't have data type and it's not coming in from our header. So let's go to our header and find this property. So it's going to be a private. We don't necessarily need to expose this value to the blueprints or other parts of our system. So I'm just going to pop it down here somewhere in between punch audio component and melee collision profile. And there's our now sort of player scope variable for our montage. All right, cool. So going back to our on attack hit, this is where all that logic happens when we actually interact with with our box. Well, what can we do now with the montage? So let's see how we're actually starting the montage. Well, we're using this thing called playAnimMontage. And this is a helper function that is tied to this player character and ultimately tied back through, oh, sorry, this isn't the header, tied back through this a character interface. So we'll get into inheritance and some more object-oriented programming concepts later on, but all you need to know is there's a method that lives here. I'm inheriting from here, so I have access to it, and it's doing stuff behind the scenes. Now, to find out what it's doing, if you have the source code, you can always dive in and take a look. So let's go back to our play animation montage call, which was right here. And we're just going to control click onto play anim montage. So 10,000 years later, we finally get IntelliSense to kick in and take us down to the play anim montage definition. And let's see what's happening in this method, because it's a helper method. It's not the raw animation instance data that we want. It's just a little wrapper. So it takes in the animation montage, and we can highlight the variable and see kind of where it's being used. And this is kind of how I go about troubleshooting and figuring stuff out. Okay, let's take a look at this variable. Where is it being used? Who's using it? So we know that Anim Instance montage plays calling Anim montage with a play rate. Okay, where's play rate? Oh, play rate is the other variable we're passing. Okay, so Anim Instance has access to this montage underscore play function that returns a float, which is the duration of this activity. So what else is this guy doing? Well, it's pulling in the Anim Instance off of our mesh. And that makes sense because the animations are tied to the skeleton is tied to the mesh, the animations belong to the mesh. Everything kind of blends together, and all of a sudden you get these anim instances living on top of our mesh object. Okay, cool. So we have access to this in our player character. We don't need to go through this helper function if we don't want to. But let's keep exploring. Let's see what else is happening in here. So we have our in-play rate, which is just going to dictate how quickly we play back our content. And then it has this little conditional that says if the duration is greater than 0, so they're simply checking that there's stuff in this montage and it's not just an empty file. It then tries to say, hey, the start section for my playback, is it null? Is it empty? Make sure it actually exists before we say anim instance montage jump to section. Which again gives me a little bit more information, because now I can say, okay, so if I want to move between sections, I can use this function, and if I want to play stuff back, I can use this function. So, being the curious busybody that I am, I'm now interested in, well, what else does UAnimInstance have that I can start scraping and sort of figuring out my problem with. So let's go back to our character and start bringing in over some of this information. So we know that when we initiate a hit, we need to get our animation instance. So if you go back to our character CPP file, I'm just going to grab this chunk of logic to bring back the instance. And I'm going to pop back over to our CPP file in onAttackHit. Down here I'm going to say UAnimInstance. And we don't need this additional conditional because we already have the mesh on our player character, which is called via this helper function of getMesh. So I've got my mesh, and I'm going to get my anim instance. I'm just going to get rid of this null pointer checker. Okay, cool. So I have an anim instance. What else is happening in this function that we can borrow and steal from? So they're validating that the montage is not null, and they're also validating that the anim instance is not null. So this guy needs this guy to play, so it makes sense that they're validated, and we can use them later on. Okay, so let's go back to our player and do the exact same thing. We know our montage exists because our montage spawned this occurrence. The collision profiles only get turned on when the attack start notification fires from our montage, and the on-attack hit only gets fired when these collision profiles are enabled. So I don't necessarily need to check for the montage being null, but I need to check that the animation instance is not null. So if it exists and it's all filled with stuff, we can now do a little bit of work. And the work that we're going to look at is figuring out how we can get that hen from not going through the object we're interacting with. So how do we do that? Well, let's first take a look at the anim instance object and see what is on it. And there's a whole pile of different properties. A lot of stuff. But if you recall, in our get character, a lot of this work is being done through these montage underscore functions. And those are important because they are the primary driver for a lot of these montage operations. So we say anim instance montage underscore. IntelliSense will kick in and just give me the list of functions with that sort of prefix. So what do we have? We got get blending out delegate, which is going to be tied to when animations are being blended out and replaced with others. We got the blend time. So what is the duration between various animations sort of blending with each other? We have get current section. So that's kind of handy. We can determine that, well, what section are we in? Are we in punch 1, punch 2, punch 3? And we don't care about this information right now because we're already passing it in, so we know what section we're currently kicking off. But if you're, let's say, coming into an environment where you have pre-canned montages with sections that you're not aware of, or you need to operate on them programmatically, you've got that flexibility. You also have to get the next section ID, so we know what is ahead. We got is stopped. We got the play rate, which is how fast things are playing. We got the get position too, which is, this one's kind of interesting because it will give us a point in time of where that animation is in its complete life cycle. We also have what is active, is playing. So is it available? Is it currently executing a montage? Jump to section, which we know is used in the play anim montage helper. Jump to section. Oh, sorry, I lost my IntelliSense. Jump to section end, so we can actually like just simply bypass parts. We got play, pause, resume, and a bunch of setters for those properties, as well as stop. Okay, interesting. So let's start with stop. That seems like a good way of stopping this animation from continuing. So we can say stop, and it expects a blend in time. So I'm not really sure what that's going to be. So let's say point F and our animation montage. So now that we have it available to us through this global variable we just created, I can just say attack montage, and cool. So let's recompile and see what happens. Okay, so our project's recompiled. Let's take a look at the game. Let me just close down this montage here, and let's start it. So we run up to our box, and we throw a punch. Oh. One hit. But, what is this weird behavior? So we are stopping the animation, but it's really jarring. Right? I mean, it is doing what we were hoping it would do, but it just looks weird, and, you know, I feel bad about this. So we're going to change it. We're going to make it a little bit better. So stop is, you know, sort of part of the answer, but we need to experiment a little bit more. So let's go back to our code, and let's take a look at what's happening within our stop. So let me just go back to, where were we? There we are. Sorry. There's our stop. And if you recall, it has this blend in value. And we set it to 0, which maybe is part of the problem. So let's set it to 1. And actually, before we set it to 1, I'm going to make this property a blueprint variable just so we can tweak it without having to recompile it constantly. So to do that, let's go back to our header. Let's flip down to our player character definition, just right at the very top. And we're just going to take this guy here because we want to be able to edit the defaults. And we're going to say this is a float of, and we're going to call this guy animation variable, for lack of a better word. And we're just going to go back to our CPP file. We're going to say animation variable. And we're just going to recompile, and then we can tweak this value through through our blueprint. And that way we don't need to keep recompiling, and our iteration cycles are going to be much, much faster. All right, so let's take a look at our blueprint character, and we should now have this new property on them. So go back to our content pane, third-person CPP, blueprints, third-person character. And let me just bring this guy over here and open the full blueprint editor. Okay, so our animation variable, I have it under audio. Let's just rejig that before I forget. So it's under animation. And we'll recompile it later, but let's go back here for a second. So our animation variable is set to 0. So let's set it to 1. And then let's restart our game. So recompile. Let's go back to our game. Oh, that's not bad. So we're hitting it, and then we're triggering our stop, and the blend out time is set to 1, so it's a little bit smoother. But you'll notice it's still kind of weird, and our hands do end up going inside the box. So it's getting there, but it's still not 100%. What can we do about that? Well, we can manipulate this value a little bit more. So let's go back to our third-person blueprint, and let's set this to be 0.5. And let's restart our game. So that's kind of not bad, but it looks a little bit smoother. You know, he punches, then his hand drops. A little bit more organic, but the hand is still going inside of the box. And that is because we have no control over the animation outside of just saying, hey, stop, and then, you know, roll back to whatever you were playing back previously. So, not bad, but, you know, I'm sure we can do better. Okay, so let's go back to our code and evaluate sort of what we're up to right now. So we have our animation instance, and we're triggering the stop. We're passing in this value for the blending speed, and that's kind of ish working. So I'm going to comment this out and put a little bit of a note here just to remind me, you know, what's happening. So it's kind of working. Animation still moves through target, but blends back out on hit and looks almost natural. So I leave these little notes for myself just to make sure I kind of don't forget and lose sight of little bits of code that are of value that I can reuse later. So what else can we do? Actually, let's go to this comment and looks at our Anim Instance variable and montage underscore, because that's where all the cool kids are hanging out. And what do we have? Well, we got jump to section. We don't necessarily want to jump to sections. We got pause. And pause is kind of interesting because pause allows us to control the flow of the animation. So if I pause this guy, and we're going to say attack montage, montage, and there's no other parameter that gets passed in here, and we recompile. Okay, so let's take a look at this pause behavior. There's our project, there's our game, and now let's hit this. Oh, so this is also interesting. It actually freezes up our whole character, or rather the upper portion of his body, because we're blending in the bottom for walking animation, and he kind of gets stuck. And if we throw our punch again, the animation playback takes over and it resumes the rest of this stuff. But up until that point, you know, we get this little frozen guy. And, you know, regardless of which hand we pause on, he does look a little bit ridiculous. But what's cool about this effect is, let's say you're doing a little matrix, you know, zoom around, slow motion, showcase the action, you know, before it hits. What we could do is we could put a collider around this box that's just a little bit bigger, and when we cross over that collider, we could pause our guy in that motion, you know, do like a matrix 360 pan, resume, and then the punch continues and the thing keeps flying. So pause is kind of cool, and it's definitely providing a better impact operation than the montage stop. But again, you know, we're paused, we're not doing much, it looks kind of weird. What else can we do? Well, let's go back to our section here. Note pause, as it will provide some fun functionality in later tutorials. Okay, so we're not going to use pause. What else do we have on here? And we're going to look just for the montage underscore functions. So is active, is playing. Yeah, okay, we can determine are things happening. Got play, pause, resume. Not play. Going back to our play animation. Play is the primary method that gets used. So what do we have in play? Well, play takes in a whole pile of different parameters. So we have our montage that we're going to play. We have the play rate, so how quickly do we want to play back this content? The return type, which is an enum, and there's the montage length and the duration, I believe. And then we have the time to start the montage at, so we can actually, move some frames in time. We don't necessarily need to start at the beginning. And then we have the stop all other montages. So if there are other animations playing, we can force this action to kill everything else. And we do actually want this. This is a good value to set. So let's play around with some of this stuff. So we got montage, our attack, montage. Our play rate is going to be 1.f. And our return types, so it was duration and montage length. So let's say duration. We're not actually going to process the return type of this method, but you have those options. Our start time is going to be 1.f. And, is it going to be 1.f? Hold on a second. We skimmed over something else. We had get position. Remember how I mentioned that this gives back the current position of our playback? Well, we can utilize this guy to get information. Oops. This is our attack montage. So we can utilize this method, which returns a float, to kick off playback from a specific point in time. So that's kind of cool. So we can pause something, and then we can resume it from that point forward, let's say after some, time elapses. But the other thing we can do with this is combine it with the play rate variable. So the play rate variable, I've only been including a positive value, but if you include a negative value of, let's say, -1f, it's going to play back the animation montage from this section. So the start point of that animation. So if we have the current position, which we're just going to take and shove in here as a parameter, and then we're going to set the stop of all montages to true. Well, what do we have? We got playback montage in reverse based on this starting point. So now when I throw my punch and our play anim montage is going to get kicked off in a positive way forward, we're going to catch it at a specific point in time and then just play it backwards. Play it backwards. Too many backs, but you guys get the point. So let's recompile and see how this guy plays out. Okay, let's go back to the editor and let's throw a punch now. Oh, I don't mind that. That is starting to look pretty slick. Now we still have a little bit of additional collision detection happening where the collider is going in, but look, how much nicer this is now working. There's only that slight little penetration of the hand going into the box, and we're going to correct that too. But it's looking much better. I mean, this swing, because it's a long-running animation, it feels kind of weird. But these guys here, they look pretty tight. We're not going in that far, and part of the problem is also the alignment of the collision boxes. So we're turning them on perhaps a little bit too late. We could turn them on a little bit earlier, and then these things would be caught. And we can very quickly readjust a bunch of that by just moving the the animation montage sections. Let's take a look at that. So our attack start notify happens around here. And there's a slight possibility that we could be interacting with the box at that point in time. I mean, it's kind of unlikely, but it could happen. And these guys here are quite similar. So by combining the positioning of the notification states with, sorry, I'm just going back to the Visual Studio Code, with some of this type of logic where we're doing reversals of our animations, we all of a sudden get a little bit more flexibility. And we can further take in this animation variable, shove it into this value on our montage play, and then through the blueprint, we can manipulate very quickly that playback rate. So what we're going to get out of this is fine-tuning capability. So as soon as this recompiles, I'm going to go in and start tweaking those values, and we can see, how it ends up playing out. There we go. I kept you talking long enough to get through the compilation process without having to fast forward through the video. So let's see what's happening here. Oh, yes. So this is broken because we didn't change the value from a positive to a negative. So let's say negative 0.5. So we're going to reverse at half the speed of the original playback. I mean, it works, but it looks goofy for the the long-running animations. Especially when it goes. Let's go a bit closer. Yeah, that's a little goofy. So let's go back to the third-person blueprint, player character blueprint, and just change this to be 1.5. So we're going to play this back a little bit faster than the original forward animation. Let's see what that looks like. So it's a little bit more snappy. Oh, that one looks good. So that long right hit, that's got a nice little snapback. Again, it's still not perfect, but you can see now we're getting this little bit of a kinetic feel, and it makes these punches just a little bit more active and exciting. So cool. As you guys can see, the animation montages give you all kinds of flexibility when in conjunction with the animation instance operations. The playback, the pauses, we got all kinds of stuff we're going to do later on with this. But for right now, I just wanted to start prepping our reversal punches as we're going to start introducing some more mechanics in subsequent videos. So I'm going to clean this project up, put it up on GitHub, and hope you guys check it out. And if not, I hope you guys tune back in for some additional videos. Thank you, and hope to see you next time.